Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Mm. Hello, guys. Let's go. First video of the day. Was it really the war of northern aggression? At and Shay. Subbed. Let's go. My name's Connor. Hit all the things.
Why did the North invade the South in 1861? Was it because they hated slavery?
That accent.
No,
okay.
It was to save the Union. Checkmate, Lincolnites!
Okay, let's go. If you aren't ready to learn, there's the door.
Pulverize the outrageous slander so often leveled upon us by carpet-bagging types who seek to besmirch the reputation of our
who seek to besmirch
great and glorious country, the Confederate States of America.
Of America.
Tonight,
okay.
we examine the pettifoggery, hypocrisy, and tyranny of our northern brethren, the meddling Yankee. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you say something just before? I simply could not hear you over the sweet sound of victory. Okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Just because abolition wasn't a primary Northern war aim doesn't change the fact that the South unequivocally seceded to preserve slavery.
All seriousness, though, there's some comedy here, obviously, but I do know very little about, or much less about U.S. history than I'd like to. Just like with world history, I've been learning more. And so I'm here to learn as well. Sort of new to the channel, so...
Northern war aim doesn't change the fact that the South unequivocally seceded to preserve slavery. South Carolina, for example. South Carolina sought succession from the Union first for reasons that are debated upon. Slavery. Debated upon? What was Lincoln's reaction? Violate constitutional law and did multiple acts of war against a state that by law should have been able to succession from the Union. In response to the actions of the president, which was tyrannical. Dude. South Carolina seceded before Lincoln was even inaugurated. Jefferson Davis was sworn in as president a full 6 days before Lincoln was. In any event, slavery was never at the forefront of the Union reason for fighting. Most southern states and slavery was never at the forefront of the Union reason for fighting. Most southern states and generals joined the CSA after Lincoln, without approval from Congress, raised an army of 75K to invade the South, which he...
The Civil War, much like World War II, two subjects that are, you know, there's a very clear bad leadership and like what we would consider more immoral. It's not simply good versus evil in any war throughout history, but pretty clear from our standpoint who was acting more reasonable and who, let's just say, was not. And I don't like to go into these subjects with that sort of, you know, Holocaust, slavery, that is a giant part of both conflicts, but keep you from really kind of learning about the subject itself. I hope that makes sense. And so I know it's a controversial, touchy subject for a good reason. But I am really trying to look at the facts. Like, you know, is it true the North, like how much was it on the minds of the Union soldiers of defeating slavery? Like how much was it, all right, I'm going to fight and die? Were they really that so much less racist than the people they were fighting? You know, how much of it was in their mind and in Lincoln's mind? I hope that makes sense.
He did on April 15th, 1861, right after the attack on Fort Sumter. And in so doing, he alienated the 4 states that were still holding out for a compromise in the spring of '61. The North was the only party calling for troops. As Virginia Governor Fletcher said, "You have chosen to inaugurate civil war." The southern states never had any intention of invading the North. We didn't need to. Do you know what the seceded states were up to for the 4 months before Fort Sumter? Chilling. Yearning for freedom from Yankee tyranny. Well, not quite. January 4th,
He's loving that. It's a great accent.
Anticipating, well, not quite. January 4th, 1861. Anticipating Alabama's immediate secession, Governor A.B. Moore ordered the state militia to seize federal property at Mount Vernon Arsenal, Fort Morgan, and Fort Gaines, effectively putting Mobile Bay in Confederate control. January 6th, a group of armed men barged into the federal arsenal at Apalachicola, Florida, and demanded the keys to the armory. January 10th, weeks before Louisiana's secession, state militia seized the U.S. arsenal at Baton Rouge on orders from the governor. The following day, they seized Forts Jackson and St. Philip, which guarded the mouth of the Mississippi. January 13th, armed Mississippians took forcible control of the unfinished federal fort on Ship Island in the Gulf. January 24th, Georgia militia seized the Augusta arsenal. February 8th, acting on orders from the governor, Arkansas militia volunteers seized the federal arsenal at Little Rock and escorted federal troops across March 6th. The Provisional Confederate Congress authorized President Davis to raise an army of 100,000 men for 12 months service. April 12th, Congress authorized President Davis to raise an army of 100.
And what was anyone know, question, what the status of telecommunication was at this time? I know, like the simple, like kind of Morse code. I know it was sometime in the 1800s. I believe it was developed. I'm just wondering if it was too soon in the 1860s, and so it was all messaging done by train and boat, and so it'd be. I would feel like it'd be really hard to coordinate this secession process that's happening.
1,000 men for 12 months service. April 12th, South Carolina militia fired on Fort Sumter. April 15th, President Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers for 3 months service to suppress the rebellion. Call me crazy, but all I see is Southern aggression. You yellow-bellied horse thief! We raided those armories and forts because we needed weapons, and plenty of them, to facilitate our peaceful and equitable separation from the Union. Good thing we did, too, for soon after the war started, the tyrant Lincoln showed his true colors. He suspended habeas corpus illegally, and
of the slaves, or all the slaves to preserve the Union. In the Douglas debate, Lincoln calls back 33. He is legally suspended habeas corpus to jail his political enemies without any charges. Okay, I definitely saw this in a different video. This part right here, illegally suspended habeas corpus. Habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is a recourse in law through which a person can report an unlawful detention or imprisonment to a court and request the court order the custodian of the person, bring the prisoner to court, determine whether detention is law. Okay, so it's you saw a guy or a friend get imprisoned. You have the ability outside the prison to say, hey, this guy did it unfairly, and so you have to bring him back to trial. But I'm assuming there's some sort of process they got to go through, because they could just do that for every prisoner. Okay, so he did that. All right, understood. My bad.
And jailed his political enemies without any charges. What do you call that except despotism of the highest order? I call that pretty typical for a 19th century wartime government. Personally, I agree with you. Suspending habeas corpus during domestic emergencies is a very, very slippery slope, but it is constitutional. Article 1, Section 9 forbids the suspension of habeas corpus except in cases of invasion or rebellion. But in 1861, Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger Taney challenged Lincoln on that exact point, arguing that the legislature alone had that power, as the framers of the Constitution clearly implied, and not the president. That's true, but initially Lincoln only suspended habeas corpus along rail lines leading to Washington, D.C., and as he pointed out in his public response to Taney, he did it to make sure that those rail lines were kept intact. Without them, Congress wouldn't be able to physically get to D.C. to convene. And by the way, when he did suspend habeas corpus for the whole country in 1863, he did it with full congressional approval. Oh, that is just so typical of you bootlicking Yankees. You have no appreciation for personal freedom. I bet you'd vote for Palpatine.
Brother.
We Confederates, on the other hand, know the meaning of liberty. Yeah. About that.
Brother.
The restriction of civil liberties in the Confederate States was actually way worse than it ever was up north. The Confederate Congress also suspended habeas corpus. Twice. They passed the Alien Enemies Act, which allowed the government to arrest anyone who didn't declare themselves as a loyal citizen of the Confederacy. They passed the sequestration.
That's the biggest check, or like checkmate, at least a check I've heard. I've been like an idiot, like, well, that's a good point. Well, that's a good point too. That's a good one right there. Well, all right, then. I don't care what Lincoln did, really. If you were much worse, I shouldn't say.
Act, which allowed the government to seize private property. They forbade civilian travel, prohibited the sale of liquor, and most famously instituted an extremely unpopular Conscription Act, the first such draft in American history. Again, all pretty typical actions for a wartime government, but you don't really have a leg to stand on when you prop up the Confederacy as this shining beacon of freedom, especially when you take into account the tyranny that's inherent in the institution of slavery. Slavery, slavery, slavery. Always you with the slavery. Well, you'll be just devastated to learn that your Lord and Savior Lincoln didn't give a damn about slavery and said so. And I quote, "My paramount object about slavery and said so." And I quote, "My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union. If I could save the Union by not freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do that. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others in bondage, I would also do that. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union."
That was a very nicely worded, pretty much in the most eloquent way, saying, yeah, I think it's slavery is moral garbage, but at the same time, slavery or not, I'm gonna fight for the Union.
From the Greek, believe it helps to save the Union. Ah, yes, the quote from the Greeley letter. Trouble is, you've taken it completely out of context. Lincoln wrote that as a public response to an editorial in the New York Tribune that criticized him for not taking more decisive action against slavery. It's worth noting that when Lincoln wrote that response, he actually had a draft of the Emancipation Proclamation already written and was just waiting for an opportunity to put it into effect. And of course he emphasized saving the Union. Most of the North was intensely racist during the Civil War, and as president, Lincoln had to placate both white supremacists and ardent abolitionists. That was Lincoln's constant struggle throughout his presidency. The purpose of that letter was to soften public opinion. Lincoln was emphasizing that he would put the immediate needs of the nation over his own personal preferences.
This is the thing I just want to say I hate again about World War II, Civil War, American Civil War. There is such a key part in both of those wars that is so evil that the losers partook in, that through movies and everything, I guess our minds just tend to do this. We go to good side versus evil side. And, oh, well, the Union, they must have all been perfectly good, anti-slavery, fighting, putting their lives on the line to end slavery. And I think all of that is bogus, and I just want to learn really what happened without, and leaving the morality aspects of everything to other people. I'm just trying to figure out what happened.
And his preference was ending slavery for good. I notice you didn't include the concluding remarks that Lincoln made in that same letter.
"I have here stated my purpose according to my view of official duty, and I intend no modification of my oft-expressed personal wish that all men everywhere could be free."
Though Lincoln personally abhorred slavery, he initially refused to infringe on slaveholders' constitutionally guaranteed property rights. Ending slavery was not his top or most immediate priority during the war, but it was a priority. In 1862, he repeatedly reached out to the border states to try to get them to favor compensated emancipation. And lest we forget, it was Lincoln's staunch opposition to expansion of slavery of any kind into the territories that caused the secession crisis in the first place. So your master may not have been pro-slavery per se, but he was still
It was too laughing at him.
He was most immediate priority during the war, but it was a priority. In 1862, he repeatedly reached out to the border states to try to get them to favor compensated emancipation. And lest we forget, it was Lincoln's staunch try to get them to favor compensated emancipation.
Oh, compensated emancipation.
And lest we forget, it was Lincoln's staunch opposition to expansion of slavery of any kind into the territories that caused the secession crisis in the first place. So your master...
Well,
the territories, Lincoln's staunch opposition to expansion of slavery of any kind into the territories that caused the secession crisis in the first place.
Well, again, just looking at it, the secession crisis started right because of they kept adding pro and again, guys, I am not confident with this stuff. Tell me when I'm wrong. You always do. I don't even have to say it, but in a messed up way, you could say that for the other side, saying that you not choosing to be what they believe was good in pro-slavery states started the thing. You know what I'm trying to say with the... Maybe... never mind.
So your master may not have been pro-slavery per se, but he was still a filthy racist. As he once said, I, as much as any other man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. Yes, he said that in the fourth debate with Stephen Douglas on September 18th, 1858. Remember, every 19th century politician had to contend with a voting base made up largely of white supremacists. Lincoln was trying to quell some potentially catastrophic rumors that he was in favor of amalgamation or the mixing of the races. If it got out that he was in favor of equal rights, he wouldn't get elected to anything in America.
Understood, but how do we know he didn't actually believe that? As much as I like to say, and feel like I know, politicians say things to get elected, and they say things to one crowd, and then go to a different crowd and hope no one notices them saying something completely different. And so I get his point. Maybe that was just to please a voting base, but where's the evidence that he didn't believe that?
But you have no real
I'm going to be torn apart in the comments. I just know it.
evidence confirming he believed anything different. You're right, but it's kind of ironic. You have to admit that you Confederates, who are normally so suspicious of Lincoln and of the federal government, are just willing to take the president's word on this.
Wish you'd just shut up.
It's like you just dredge up these quotes without taking even a little bit of time to research or comprehend their contexts. Both are clear examples of political grandstanding. Politicians lie. They exaggerate. They try to appeal to as many people as possible. Progressive politicians in particular lie about how committed they are to progressive ideas all the time.
I believe that marriage is between a man and a woman.
I do not support gay marriage, but I support a very strong version of civil unions.
This ruling will strengthen all of our communities
Sorry. And sorry about the banging in the background. Got some construction.
by offering to all loving same-sex couples the dignity of marriage across this great land.
Just because Obama lied
Flip-flop,
about the gays
but
does not mean that
Again, that's every politician.
Lincoln lied about the blacks. Fair enough. You know,
Well-
the gays does not mean that Lincoln lied about the blacks.
Again, but you don't know if their opinions switched.
Fair enough.
Am I being naive?
You know, many free staters wanted their territories to be whites-only havens. Oops! Not supposed to talk about that. Yes, and speaking of Lincoln, throughout much of his political career, he was in favor of colonization, which would have entailed freeing American slaves and then sending them off to a colony in Africa. Which, yeah, yeesh. It was a proposed solution to the main argument against abolition at the time,
Isn't that
which
how
was that it would be impossible
Liberia?
to integrate blacks into American society. And that's horrifying, but at the time, that was a very anti-slavery position. Now, we can argue about whether to judge Lincoln by the standards of racism in the 19th century or the standards of racism today. But the fact that he consistently fought against slavery is beyond dispute. So what if he did? It doesn't change the fact that after the Emancipation Proclamation made freeing the slaves a war aim, average Yankee soldiers deserted in the thousands. And that forced the United States to pass a conscription act of their own, which famously led to the New York City draft riots, one of the ugliest episodes in Civil War history. But focusing purely on the undeniable white supremacy of Northerners during the war diminishes the significance of the sizable minority of abolitionists in the North. Now, it's important to differentiate here between an anti-slavery position and an abolitionist one. Most Northerners before the war were anti-slavery, but they either wanted to contain it and allow it to go extinct on its own, or they wanted to gradually free the slaves with compensation to slave owners. Abolitionists took it a step further. They wanted to see the immediate, unconditional emancipation of all black Americans. New England was the hotbed of abolition at the time and was home to
New England, baby.
its most famous and influential advocates. When John Brown's raid failed in 1859, most Northerners viewed him as a lunatic, a total psycho. But abolitionists like Henry David Thoreau successfully changed public opinion, and pretty soon Brown was being regarded as a martyr and a hero. It's in the song, right? John Brown's body lies moldering in the grave. John
really
Brown's
don't have to give
body
us a
lies
performance,
moldering
Billy
in the grave. John Brown's
really don't have to give us
body
a
lies
performance,
moldering
Billy
in the grave. John Brown's body lies moldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Shut up. Glory, glory, hallelujah.
How does he do that? That's such a good camera split. Unless he has an identical twin.
Glory, glory, hallelujah. And his soul goes marching on. And by the end of the war, many Union soldiers did consider their cause to be abolitionist. This was mainly because of the large number of contraband slaves that would follow Union armies wherever they went. And these Yankee boys, many of whom had never been to the South in their lives, were being confronted by the horrifying realities of slavery for the very first time. This hardened their hearts against that institution, and they said as much in their diaries and letters. Higher up, the logistical problems caused by this large number of escaped slaves forced commanders and politicians to take the idea of immediate abolitionism more seriously. So, by mid-war, freeing the slaves wasn't just a moral imperative, it was also a practical necessity. Well, you Yankees are just uncultured and basically miserable. That's the main difference.
Jefferson Davis made it very clear that the war was not over slavery. Lincoln said his intentions in the war was not to end any form of slavery, but to keep the Union preserved. You are nothing but a carpet-bagging scalawag with nothing but bias hater for Southerners, brother Kekona. It's no wonder you Yanks are uncultured and basically miserable. Southern boy outdoors.
Yankees are just uncultured and basically miserable. That's the main difference between us. As our glorious President Jefferson Davis once said in a speech at the Mississippi State Capitol,
Our enemies are a traditionalist and a homeless race. From the time of Cromwell to the present moment, they have been disturbers of the peace of the world. Gathered together by Cromwell from the bogs and fens of the north of Ireland and of England, they commenced by disturbing the peace of their own country. They disturbed Holland, to which they fled, and they disturbed England upon their return. They persecuted Catholics in England, and they hung Quakers and witches in America.
and clearly the apple does not fall far from the tree.
Wait, is the Union persona this guy being sort of himself, and the Southerner persona, is he trying to personify the comments in the comment section, like for Southerners? Like, is that where he's getting most of his dialogue and character? Of just trying to like disprove, I guess the Southern sympathizer. Oh God, it's brilliant.
Oh, Oh!
Your
Thou
turn.
art an unlearned swine if thou dost truly believe that papists, Quakers, and witches ought to be shown mercy. But religious freedom is one of the founding principles. The devil's tongue wags in thy mouth. Those who love the Lord must needs separate themselves entirely from the professors of heathen faiths. You know, that's not a bad point. Mixed communities are a disaster. Usually it's just one community getting to the top anyway. Communities are better kept separate, or at least totally homogeneous. Or so that way they can preserve their race, identity, and culture. If you ever noticed, mixed communities look just like New York City and have no identity. Bastardizing anything you need.
What have you done?
Devil rat. My God. I have returned.
His prop department is amazing.
Where I live in the desperate city
O'Reilly.
of lights, bending by mountains of sin, I behold your glory. You have no power here, which finds a children.
Hand off the white. The babble. It's ridiculous.
I will draw thee out, Satan, as poison is drawn from a wand.
If I go, Johnny Rip dies.
Thou hast not killed me. Thou shalt not kill him.
The South is mine. Begone!
What is his film budget? What happened?
My work here is done. Okay, what happened? Hey man, are you okay? You fucking stupid to compare a Nazi to a Confederate. That's Yankee propaganda teaching you more lies. A Nazi to a Confederate.
Nah, you teach you more or less American. Maybe in some cases another bad treated to you, but Grant would treat them.
That's Yankee propaganda teaching you more lies. Good to have you back, buddy. Southerns treated African American maybe better in some cases. I know they were bad treated, but you think U.S. Grant treated them better them days? LMAO.
Did I post this? Do I post this? That was a great video. All right, I'm watching Stalingrad. See ya.